Think about the last time you tried to fix like a truly toxic dynamic in your life.
Oh, yeah, we've all been there.
Right. Maybe it was a dysfunctional team at work or even just a personal struggle, like finally trying to stick to a healthy routine.
And you probably just relied on willpower.
Yeah, exactly. You lectured yourself or you gave this stern talking to your team, trying to force everyone to just, do the right thing.
Which almost never works.
No, if you're being honest, it probably failed miserably. And today, we are looking at a thesis that says relying on morality or willpower isn't just ineffective, it is mathematically the absolute worst way to solve a problem.
Yeah, we have this deeply ingrained default setting. We assume that if we just try harder, or, if we just appeal to someone's better nature with enough passion, the underlying issue will just, poof, resolve itself.
Like it's a character flaw.
Right. And we treat almost every systemic failure as a crisis of individual moral effort.
Which is why today's deep dive is really going to challenge a lot of assumptions. We are pulling from this fascinating piece of source material. It's a 2022 essay by an author named Feng.
The title alone really sets the tone.
It is incredibly direct. It's called Instead of Moral Preaching, Change the Program.
I love that. Change the program.
Yeah, and our mission today is to explore this radical premise. We are going to look at how this author applies this concept, starting with 18th century shipping logistics.
As one does.
Naturally, and then scaling it all the way up to literally reprogramming the fundamental building blocks of the human experience.
It is a wild ride.
It really is. Okay, let's unpack this because the essay kicks off with a historical example that is both gripping and just completely illustrative of this concept. We are going back to 18th century England.
Right. So the setting here is the era of British convict transportation. England was facing this massive, massive crisis with domestic prisoner overcrowding.
They just ran out of space.
Exactly. So to relieve that pressure on their own prisons and, simultaneously help develop their new colonial foothold, the British government began transporting thousands of convicts across the ocean to Australia.
And they didn't just use government ships for this, right?
No, they didn't use a fleet of government ships for this massive logistical undertaking. Instead, they contracted private ship owners to handle the transport.
Okay, so the government had to figure out how to pay these private contractors. And the program, like the core incentive structure they designed, was to pay the ship owners based on the number of convicts who boarded the ship back in England.
That's the crucial detail. Boarded the ship.
Right. And I want you listening to take just a few seconds to imagine what kind of human behavior that specific metric incentivizes.
I mean, it creates a pure volume incentive. The captains and the fleet owners were entirely motivated to maximize profit per voyage.
Because they get paid per head up front.
Exactly, which meant packing as many human bodies as physically possible into the holds of these ships.
And the historical record described in the text is just horrific.
Oh, it's grim.
We are talking about severely overcrowded cabins, air so stagnant it was unbreathable, and like an absolute zero-tolerance policy for spending any money on the comfort or health of the passengers.
Because why would they? The financial transaction was complete the moment the convict stepped onto the deck.
Wow.
Yeah, whether that person actually survived the months-long journey to Australia has zero impact on the captain's bottom line.
The numbers the author pulls to illustrate this are staggering. The average mortality rate across these voyages was a staggering 12%.
12%. Just think about that.
It's awful. And the essay highlights one specific voyage where a ship crammed 424 convicts on board, and 158 of those people died before they ever saw land.
Over a third of the human cargo just gone.
So the British government obviously sees this humanitarian and logistical disaster unfolding, and they decide they need to intervene.
Right, they have to do something.
But their very first instinct is to apply a moral and regulatory fix.
Yes, they deployed the standard playbook for oversight. The government dispatched official supervisors to ride along on the ships.
Sounds logical.
Sure, on paper. They drafted mandatory, rigid regulations dictating the living conditions, the space required per person, the rations. They even went so far as to mandate that doctors be present on the voyages.
Trying to force them to be good.
Exactly. The underlying philosophy was entirely based on enforcement. It was like, these captains are acting wickedly, we need to police them into doing the right thing.
But, and this is the kicker, when you introduce a moral referee into a fundamentally broken financial game, The players just learned to cheat the referee.
That is exactly what happened.
The text details how the ship owners, who were entirely intent on protecting their massive profit margins, simply bought off the supervising officials and the doctors with bribes.
And if that didn't work?
Well, if an official possessed too much integrity and refused the bribe, the text notes they were simply thrown into the sea or murdered by other means.
Just brutal.
So all that regulation, all those doctors, and the death rate remained exactly as catastrophic as before.
And that historical failure perfectly encapsulates the author's core argument. You simply cannot regulate your way out of a fundamentally flawed incentive structure.
It's impossible.
Right. Whenever you build a system that relies on forcing people to act in direct opposition to their own designed incentives, the system will collapse.
You know, I am reading this historical account, and I cannot help but see the parallels to poorly designed corporate structures today.
Oh, absolutely.
You see a company set an absolutely impossible, ridiculous sales quota. Then, to make sure people hit it ethically, they send in an army of HR managers and compliance officers.
And what did the employees do?
The employees, who are terrified for their jobs, just find increasingly creative, sometimes highly destructive ways to game the system anyway. Like, is this just a symptom of unchecked capitalism or a fundamental truth about human nature? Because the behavior doesn't change, the tactics just get stealthier.
Yeah, the friction is a structural inevitability. Which brings us to the ultimate solution presented in the essay. After all the failed oversight and all the dead supervisors, the British government stopped trying to preach morality.
They gave up on the lectures.
They did. They stopped trying to force compliance. They simply altered the payment procedure. They changed the underlying program.
They stopped paying based on who boarded the ship in England.
Right.
And they started paying exclusively based on how many convicts were safely delivered to the docks in Australia.
And what's fascinating here is the immediate, almost unbelievable psychological and behavioral shift that followed.
It was overnight, wasn't it?
Literally. The text points out that these were the exact same greedy ship owners. These were the same men who, just months prior, were willing to throw government officials overboard to save a buck.
And now,
Suddenly, they were making every conceivable effort to protect the lives of the convicts. They proactively improved the diet, they sanitized the living conditions, and they actively sought out medical treatment for the sick.
because a dead convict meant lost money.
Precisely. The mortality rate plummeted from 12% to 1%. It happened almost instantly.
That is wild. They didn't send the ship captains to ethics classes. They didn't give them a newfound moral compass.
No moral preaching at all.
All they did was align the financial reward with the desired outcome of keeping people alive.
And the author uses this powerful historical anchor to establish an ironclad rule for the rest of the essay. The quote is, "Once the program changes, the state of chaos immediately disappears."
Okay, so having proven that this mechanism works in the realm of shipping logistics, the essay then makes a massive pivot.
A huge pivot.
The author takes this exact same framework and applies it to a profound critique of modern human society. Because if changing the program works so perfectly for brutal 18th century logistics, the obvious question is whether it can work for the infinitely more complex, nuanced world of human relationships. And the author argues that our current social programs, like the very fabric of how we interact, are completely broken, starting with our reliance on traditional morality.
Yeah, the first major target in the text is the concept of filial piety.
Which is huge in a lot of cultures.
Exactly. For listeners unfamiliar with the depth of this concept, it is a cornerstone of traditional moral expectations in many cultures. It's the unwavering idea that children must dutifully and respectfully care for their aging parents.
It's an obligation.
The text points out that societies have spent thousands of years preaching this doctrine, elevating it with sayings like, filial piety is the foremost of all virtues.
But the author challenges the effectiveness of that thousands-year-old sermon with a genuinely brutal quote. I have it here. They write, "Despite loving parents having been around since ancient times who have seen filial children."
Ouch.
I know, it is a harsh assessment. But the underlying point is that lecturing people to take care of their elders simply hasn't stopped the profound suffering and neglect of the elderly.
It's the convict ship all over again. The moral preaching isn't working.
Right. So rather than preaching louder, the text introduces a totally different program created by the author's community known as Lifechanyuan. They call this new system the second home life mode.
And to understand the second home model, we have to look at the author's critique of how we currently handle aging. The text argues that using real estate for retirement or relying on group retirement facilities, hotels, nursing homes,
Or just hoping a pension will cover it,
yeah, these are all failing programs. They fundamentally fail to alleviate the physical and emotional suffering of aging, particularly for anyone without significant wealth.
which is most people.
Right. The second home model claims to bypass this entirely. The mechanism relies on a communal life mode. By pooling resources and eliminating the private individual financial burden of retirement, the text claims that all elderly people, regardless of whether they have personal wealth or offspring to care for them, can live their later years in happiness and security.
Okay, so they tackle the logistical nightmare of aging by making it a communal responsibility, effectively changing the incentive from individual survival to collective care.
Exactly.
But then the author goes after an even bigger target, marriage.
Oh, yeah. They don't hold back here.
Not at all. The text claims that over thousands of years, very few people have actually figured out how to handle marital relationships successfully. The author's view is that the possessiveness inherent in marriage brings endless pain, friction, and confusion.
So their solution.
The second home solution is stunningly simple. Just eliminate marital relationships entirely.
The logic presented is incredibly linear, almost algorithmic. If the exclusive bond of marriage is the root cause of the emotional pain and interpersonal confusion, then removing the institution of marriage causes those specific troubles to evaporate.
Delete the program, delete the bug.
Right. By changing the program and removing the structural expectation of exclusivity, the associated worries are deleted.
See, here's where it gets really interesting because I absolutely have to push back on this kind of thinking.
Go for it.
Getting rid of marriage entirely just to avoid relationship problems, isn't that like noticing a terrible rattling noise in your car's engine and deciding the best way to fix it is to just remove the engine entirely?
I mean, the rattling noise would be gone.
Sure, the rattling noise is technically gone, but the car doesn't drive anymore. Are we actually solving the complex problem of human intimacy, or are we just coldly eliminating a fundamental part of the human experience to avoid the messy parts?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture of the author's overarching philosophy, we see a very specific prioritization at play.
What do you mean?
Strictly according to the text, the author views interpersonal friction, the messy arguments, the jealousy, the compromises, not as a necessary crucible for personal growth, but as a systemic error.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it is viewed as a bug in the software of humanity. In this utopian framework, that friction can and absolutely should be designed out of existence. The ultimate priority is total systemic harmony. If traditional family structures create friction, the structure must be dismantled.
But if you completely dissolve the marital bond, you immediately create a massive structural vacuum for the next generation. Like, if the traditional family unit is gone, how does this new program handle raising children?
That is the next logical question, right?
Because the text argues that most parents are actually operating with deeply flawed perspectives on life. And because parents are flawed, the values, biases, and worldviews they pass down to their kids are incomplete, which just sets the next generation up for a cycle of frustration and failure.
And the proposed program change for child rearing is perhaps the most radical shift in the essay.
It's intense.
The text suggests taking children from a young age and placing them in a specialized environment. Instead of being raised by their biological parents, they are nurtured and educated entirely by what the author calls perfect teachers in their spiritual realm.
It is the ultimate shift from an artisanal process to an assembly line.
That's a great way to put it.
Think about it. Raising a kid right now is an artisanal, messy, home-crafted process. Every parent is an amateur trying to figure it out on the fly, making mistakes, passing on their own quirks.
We're all just winging it.
Exactly. But the author is suggesting we move to a highly standardized, specialized factory model to ensure absolute quality control over human values. The text claims this frees the parents from the immense labor and stress of child rearing while guaranteeing the kids get the correct worldview.
And it's worth noting the author explicitly claims that the Lifechanyuan community has successfully proven this model through 10 years of actual practice.
10 years, wow. So it represents a complete dismantling and restructuring of the basic biological family unit.
The author is applying the exact same mechanical logic as the convict ships. The current system produces a high failure rate, in this case, generational trauma, bad habits, and flawed values.
So you swap out the incentive structure.
Exactly. Therefore, you remove the flawed operators, the parents, and replace them with a more efficient, specialized program that guarantees the desired output.
Okay, so let's tally this up. We have reprogrammed elder care, we have deleted marriage. And we have outsourced child rearing to spiritual teachers. We are essentially rebuilding human interaction from scratch.
Pretty much.
But the essay does not stop there. It scales way, way up. If we can reprogram the micro level of a family, the author asks, can we reprogram the macro level of the entire world?
And the author firmly believes the answer is yes. The text moves on to tackle some of the largest, most intractable existential threats humanity faces.
Let's start with death.
Yeah, it starts with the end of life itself. The essay points out a very modern, very real complaint, that people literally can't afford to die because burial plots, caskets, and funeral costs have become astronomically high.
I mean, that part is undeniably true. Funerals are ridiculously expensive.
Right. So to fix this financial exploitation of grief, they propose the Lifechanyuan funeral system. The text claims this specific program makes death not just affordable, but allows people to depart the world, and I quote, gracefully and elegantly.
Okay, so from the logistics of funerals, the text jumps to the ultimate human conflict, war.
The big one.
For thousands of years, wars have devastated populations and drained resources. The author challenges the reader, asking if humanity is really so ignorant that we cannot solve this.
And their proposed program change to eliminate war is total global unification.
They propose erasing national borders entirely. The text paints a picture of allowing all people to freely move around the globe without restriction.
It's a huge vision.
Yeah, the core logic relies on a philosophical concept of interconnectedness. Like, if everyone is free and everyone views humanity as one organism where you are in me and I am in you, then the concept of the other disappears. And if there is no other, who is left to fight?
The systemic result of erasing those borders, according to the text, is the complete evaporation of military spending. No more standing armies, no more soldiers, no more destruction of infrastructure.
Because there's nothing to defend.
Right. The author frames this massive geopolitical transformation as merely a matter of changing the program from division to unity.
But then, the essay takes a massive, almost dizzying leap.
Buckle up.
Seriously.
Yeah.
It is one thing to say that erasing national borders stops human armies from fighting. We can track that logic. But the author goes on to claim that by changing humanity's production and life mode programs, we can solve literal floods, droughts, epidemics, social unrest, corruption, and wealth disparity.
It's a bold claim.
They claim this unified program will actually lead to favorable weather and total happiness for everyone. So what does this all mean? I can understand how a new social program reallocates military funding, but how on earth does changing a human lifestyle program stop a literal flood or a drought?
That specific question strikes at the very crux of the essay's ultimate claim, and it requires a significant shift in how we understand the author's worldview.
Okay, help me out here.
To the author, a drought or a flood isn't just an isolated meteorological event. It is intertwined with human chaos.
Wait, really?
Yes. In a purely logistical sense, a unified global program without borders means resources can be instantly deployed to mitigate any natural disaster, meaning no one suffers the effects of the drought.
Okay, that makes logistical sense.
But more profoundly, the text implies a cosmological worldview where human harmony and natural harmony are linked. The author believes that installing this perfect unified global program aligns humanity with a universal order, resolving both social chaos and environmental chaos simultaneously.
Okay, but a global system that redesigns human families, erases borders, and claims to harmonize with the weather doesn't just run itself. Who or what is actually sitting at the top of this new structural pyramid?
That is the million-dollar question.
Because the author introduces a very specific figure they believe is uniquely capable of leading this unprecedented change.
They do. The text states that by observing outstanding historical figures and current world leaders, it is evident to the author that only the deiform Buddha of Lifechanyuan can truly lead humanity into this desired era of peace.
And they make a pretty big cultural comparison to back that up, right?
Yes, to underscore the magnitude of this leadership, the author makes a specific comparison. They state that even if the Ziwei saint, which for context is a prophesied figure of ultimate salvation in Chinese culture, were to descend to earth, they would be unable to surpass the leadership and structural design of this deiform Buddha.
Right. And as we map out this architecture, I want to be incredibly clear to you listening. Our role in this deep dive is strictly to unpack the fascinating progression of claims made in this 2022 essay.
Absolutely.
We are exploring the mechanics of the author's arguments. We are not validating or endorsing the religious or spiritual figures mentioned, nor are we verifying the utopian claims of weather control. We are simply examining how a single piece of text bridges the gap from the undeniably practical metrics of 18th century ships to the sweeping claims of spiritual global leadership.
And this raises an important question about how utopian frameworks actually operate. Well, they almost always begin by anchoring you in highly practical, undeniable logistical changes. You look at the math of paying a ship captain only for safe delivery, and you have to agree with it. It is structurally sound.
You can't argue with the math.
Right. But utopian philosophies use that grounded reality to build a runway for a massive existential leap of faith, where logistical efficiency suddenly scales up into spiritual transformation and control over the natural world.
It is a brilliant rhetorical strategy. You start by nodding along, completely agreeing that changing a payment structure makes logical sense. And before you realize how far you've traveled down the path, you are being asked to delete the institution of marriage, hand your children over to spiritual teachers, and erase national daughters to stop a drought.
It forces the reader to confront the limits of systems thinking. We have to ask ourselves, at what point does a system stop organizing human nature and start attempting to overwrite human nature entirely?
Can absolutely everything be solved by installing a better program?
It's a huge question.
Which brings us right back to you listening to this right now. Take a look at your own life and the problems that are nagging at you today. Are you trapped in a cycle of endless moral preaching to yourself?
Just trying to push through.
Right. Are you just trying to force yourself to be more disciplined, more productive, or more patient, and then feeling a heavy burden of guilt when your willpower inevitably gives out?
The incredibly practical, grounded takeaway from the first half of this text is undeniably powerful. Maybe you aren't the problem. Maybe your character isn't flawed.
Maybe your program is the problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you take a step back and adjust your personal incentives, the environment, the rewards, the structures around you, the chaotic behavior you are trying to fix might just resolve itself effortlessly.
But stepping back and looking at the entire essay, it leaves us with a really deep, almost unsettling philosophical puzzle.
It truly does. If we take the author's premise all the way to its absolute logical conclusion, if we actually could perfectly redesign all global systems and every single incentive so that no human being could ever possibly profit from another person's suffering, just like those ship captains whose greed was harnessed to keep people alive.
Would we even need morality?
Exactly. Would humanity even need the concept of morality anymore? Or would a mathematically perfect, frictionless system render human goodness entirely obsolete?
That is a wild thought to chew on. Is human goodness just a necessary band-aid we've invented to cover up thousands of years of bad systemic design? We are going to leave you to mull that one over on your own. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive, and we will catch you next time.